Welcome. Today I'll be teaching you how to do state machines in uNode. First of all, let's create a graph in uNode. I'm going to do a runtime graph for now and just use a class component type. Save it and call it state machine test. First of all, to create a new state machine, you got to go to the event graph, and then on graph top where the plus button is, you can click and you say add new state machine. In order to go into the state machine, you have to click on it, and to add a state, you actually have to right click and add state. You can have multiple state machines per graph, but just note that it can actually maybe affect performance if you start adding too many to a specific graph. I've never tested it, so I don't not entirely sure. So in uNode, basically you can use states like this without having to plug them into the entry node. You can also have many types of states like any states, which will run always, and nested states, which will be essentially the same thing as these, but you can have states inside of states. That's called a nested state. Also, what you can do if you have external graphs or functions, let's make a test function here. You can actually get references to those state machines by dragging the state machine onto the function or in your event graph, and you can simply set them active or get what's active currently from the state machine. Another neat little trick is you can also use the uNode inspector to change how the state machine is updated every single frame, or where it is updated specifically. I usually like mine to do manual since I do networking with uNode. So if I were to do manual, and I were to do something like, for example, this is my onTick function for networking, I would simply say state machine tick, and hook that up to the flow. And then it will now tick with the network, just as an example. Okay, let's get started with something basic. So what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to make a simple state machine that simply allows you to swap the color of cubes in order. So let us make 3 states: cube 1, cube 2, and cube 3. So we're going to change the color / material of all these cubes in a specific sequence. So in the beginning, when the state machine starts, I'm going to make a connection by right-clicking on the entry and making a connection to cube 1. So how do we want this to work? In order to transition between these states, we're going to need a transition. There's multiple ways to make a transition, but you right-click on a state and you say add transition. I usually recommend doing the empty route, but if you want a specific one to happen, I would say on state update. So this will only happen when, now let's rather do just normal update. So this update will only get called once it's in this state, and this update will call every single frame until it can get to the second state. So when you double click on update here, you can actually do update, and you can do a wait for seconds in here. Wait for seconds, I got it created over here. Wait for seconds. Go back in here and then add it here. This is just a basic example, but you shouldn't really normally use coroutines inside states, but you can if you really want to. So within 1 second, I want to trigger this transition. So what I can do now, I can basically just copy this and do the exact same thing for the other transition as well. Copy paste and put it over here. Okay, now let's get started with the actual logic. So we're going to need a list of the cubes we want to change. So let's do a list of game objects. And let's call it cubes. And in this cubes, I'm going to go into cube 1. And I'm going to say on state add right on the inside of the state and say add on state enter, because you can have multiple of these at the same time, but they'll all follow in execution order like this. So for within the state, you got onState enter, onState exit, and onState update. This is unique to the state machine, well, to basically any state machine. For now, I'm just going to use onState enter. Then I'm going to basically do the cube, and I'm going to get the first item from the list. Let me just turn off this thing real quick here on preferences. If this is bothering you with uNode, you can tick off the auto carry input value. Then it will no longer do the carry when doing this alongside this node. Okay, so on state enter, I'm just going to say get component renderer. Out of the renderer, we can do a simple material. And then we can do set color. And hook it up to onState enter. And let us, for example, depending on what render pipeline you are in, you will need to name this accordingly. So if I recall correctly, for URP, if I create a cube now, and I just create a custom material, cube mat 1, and assign it to this cube. If you want to know how it's spelled in code, you can always go and check the documentation, but usually it is underscore base color. So if I, for example, now want to go and check what the actual color is for URP's base color, URP base color in scripting, it will basically be underscore base color exactly spelled like this. So I can copy this, go back into uNode, and put it back in here. And I want, so on the status entered, I want the cube to turn, let us do blue for now. Set the alpha up. And now I can just basically copy this entire piece of code that I have here and do it for every single state. I want to turn all these cubes blue in succession. So on state enter. And by this time, I'm going to change the index from P0 to 1 and vice versa for cube 3. And basically our state machine is set up. Now we just got to create our cubes and populate it within the list. So since this is already a class component, we know we don't need to compile this. So I'm just going to create an empty game object here called state machine for cubes. State, not that state machine. State. I can just drag it on here. There we go. And assign 3 cubes that I want. So let me create these cubes here. Cube. And cube. Let's position the camera correctly. And assign our material we made to each one. Okay. So now, if I go to the state machine for cubes and I assign each game object to the respective slots and press play, our cube should automatically turn to blue now. If we, from what I remember, we set the color to blue. So if I press play, okay, we can see this is not currently working. Why is that? If we debug it and see our entry, see it's not getting called. Interesting. Sorry about that, my dumb ass forgot to set the update view of the state machine back to update. So if I play now, the state machine will now fire correctly. Blue, blue, and blue. As you can see here, void space in the state machine graph. We can also have this loop back around. So it goes back to exactly the way how we want. So let's say, for example, we want now to add an empty transition and make a connection back to Q1. Let's call this restart. And add trigger transition and select our event we just created. And now this should repeat. But instead of actually specifying a color to begin with, let us assign a color that we want now we can assign during runtime. So let us do color here. Cube1 color. Cube1 color. Please don't use spaces in your variable names, I beg you. Let's make this one yellow. Let's duplicate this. Cube2 color. Cube3 color. I'm going to change this one to green. Change this one to red. Okay. So on Cube1, I drag out the color value for Cube1, plug it in, click on the state machine, go back to Cube2, and do the exact same basically for them. Okay, we're ready to set up. Now I can also change these colors in the inspector while I'm playing, and this will also affect them. Yellow, green, red. Now if I change this like white, pink, and blue, it's going to update like this continuously. So it's going to loop in back on itself the entire time. Okay, this concludes the first part of the state machine tutorial. I'll go into more advanced stuff with the state machine in the next few sections. Goodbye for now, and thank you for watching.